Let's set the scene. It's 1983. We're deep in the New Mexico desert. In the dead of night, a convoy of trucks just appears, rumbling through the absolute silence. So what are they carrying? You'd think weapons, maybe some government secret. No, it's millions of brand new video game cartridges. But they're not here to deliver them. They're here to do the exact opposite. They're here to dump them in a pit, crush them with bulldozers, and then pour a layer of concrete over the whole mess. So the question is, why? Why would a company literally bury its own product? Why hide what was supposed to be their biggest success? Well, to get that answer, we have to go back. We have to understand the incredible story of the empire that basically invented modern gaming, and then let the match that burned it all down. This is the story of Atari, the rise and the ruin. Our story really kicks off in 1972 in sunny California. A brilliant young engineer, Nolan Bushnell, he has this wild idea. What if we could play games on a TV screen? And so he creates Pong. Just two simple paddles and one little ball. And with that, boom, the world was never the same again. And their rise was, it was just meteoric. They start the company in 72. By 77, they drop the Atari 2600, bringing arcade action right into your living room. And by 1982, they weren't just some company. They were a force of nature. For an entire generation, Atari was video games. Get this, by 1982, Atari was pulling in $2 billion a year. Let that sink in. That was more money than the entire American movie industry was making combined. They were the fastest growing company in the history of the United States. They seemed totally unstoppable. Or so it seemed. And this is where the story takes a dark turn. Because with all that success, a poison started to creep in. Arrogance. At the very peak of their power, Atari started to believe its own legend. They got sloppy, they got reckless, and the cracks in their empire started to show. There's a quote that says it all. They were printing money so fast, they stopped caring about quality. Suddenly, the floodgates were open. Anybody could make a game for the 2600. There was no one checking for quality, no approval process, nothing. And the market just got flooded with cheap, broken, absolutely unplayable garbage. And people started to notice. Now, by 1982, there are 10 million Atari 2600s out there. That's a massive, loyal audience. But Atari stopped seeing them as fans to be cared for. They started seeing them as a market to be milked for every last cent. Which brings us to the first big disaster, Pac-Man. They were so unbelievably confident that this arcade smash hit would sell, they made 12 million copies of the game. Now think about that for a second. They made 2 million more games than there were consoles in the entire world to play them on. That's not confidence. That's pure hubris. And the game? Oh, the game was a total betrayal. It was a flickering, glitchy, awful mess that looked and felt nothing like the game people loved in the arcades. This was supposed to be the biggest game of all time. Instead, it became one of history's greatest disappointments. But they weren't finished digging their own grave. Not yet. Next up, the movie tie-in for Spielberg's E.T. Now, a typical game back then took about 6 months to make, right? Atari gave the developer, Howard Scott Warshaw, just 5 weeks. 5 weeks to create a classic. It was an impossible task. And the results? Exactly what you'd expect. A confusing, broken, deeply frustrating game. They made 4 million copies. Only 1.5 million actually sold. The other 2.5 million, they were either returned by furious parents and kids, or they just rotted on store shelves. And these are the cartridges that ended up in that landfill. This was the failure they tried to bury. Look, this wasn't just about 2 bad games. This was the tipping point. Atari's arrogance had poisoned the entire industry, so in 1983, the whole thing just imploded. We call it the Great Video Game Crash. For Atari, and for an entire generation of gaming, it was game over. The financial damage was almost unbelievable. The company lost $536 million in 1 year. At that time, that was an astronomical amount of money. The empire wasn't just cracking, it was turning to dust. As you can imagine, their parent company, Warner Communications, was beyond angry. And the fallout was swift and it was brutal. The company that was once their shining star, their cash cow, was unceremoniously broken up into pieces and sold off for scraps. The king was dead. But you know what they say about nature abhorring a vacuum. From the ashes of Atari's failure, a new power rose from Japan, Nintendo. And they had been taking notes. Where Atari had chaos, Nintendo had control. They introduced the Nintendo seal of quality, basically a promise to you, the customer, that the game you just bought wasn't going to be a piece of junk. So what's the big takeaway from this spectacular collapse? Well, Atari's story, it's more than just a piece of trivia. It's a really powerful cautionary tale. It's a lesson written in code and buried under concrete. And the ghosts of that empire, they have so much to teach us. Okay, lesson number 1, and it's the big one. Quality will always, always be quantity. Atari thought they could just shovel product into the market and people would buy it no matter what. They were dead wrong. Because trust, once you lose it, is almost impossible to get back. Lesson number 2 is just as important. Never, ever take your customers for granted. Atari looked at its fans and didn't see a community. They saw a bunch of walking wallets. They totally forgot that loyalty is a two-way street. You have to earn it, you have to respect it, you can't just exploit it. And finally, there's a huge strategic lesson here. You have to control your ecosystem. By letting any old game get published on their console, Atari created chaos. It destroyed everyone's confidence. Nintendo saw that mistake and built what we call a walled garden, guaranteeing a basic level of quality. And by doing that, they literally saved the industry that Atari had wrecked. When you really boil it all down, the downfall of this giant came from 3 classic human flaws. Greed, this insatiable desire for more. Laziness, always taking the easy way out instead of the right way. And above all, arrogance, the absolute belief that they were too big to fail.
You know, the tragic thing is, Atari changed the world. They were pioneers. They were visionaries. They literally built an industry from scratch. Which leaves us with this one last haunting question. What's the real difference between a legend that inspires us and a ghost that can only warn us?